Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, October 21st, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Pennsylvania Senate race, where John Fetterman, Dr. Oz are in an extremely close and competitive race, where it looks like this Senate seat might be the most contentious of the 2022 election cycle. Now, the 538 forecast currently gives John Fetterman, the incumbent lieutenant governor of the state, a 61% chance at winning the Senate seat from the Republican Party. Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, better known as the TV personality from Oprah and his own television show, is the Republican nominee for Senate, who is at a 39% chance at winning the seat for the Republican Party, but ultimately maintaining party control. The Pennsylvania Senate race has long been viewed as a premier Democratic pickup opportunity, simply because Republicans failed to field an extremely strong candidate, and in a sense that is correct. Dr. Oz, as a Republican, should be dominating this Senate seat, especially given the national environment. Democrats lost the seat in 2010, they lost it in 2016, and even in 2016, Republicans were polling worse than they are polling today, which means at that point in time, and even on the generic ballot, Republicans should have done worse in Pennsylvania in 2016 than they should be expected to now. However, that is simply not the case. In fact, it is far from it. The state of Pennsylvania right now is also one that people see as an extremely competitive race because of its 2020 election result. If you remember, it's a state that President Biden won in 2020, but President Trump won it back in 2016. When President Biden won the state of Pennsylvania, it wasn't by an overwhelmingly large margin. Rather, it was by a margin of just 1.2%. Joe Biden received 50% of the vote to Donald Trump's 48.8%. It was an extremely close election, but ultimately the Democrats prevailed. But we knew at this point that should the national environment get any slightly better for the GOP, that Pennsylvania would be an immediate opportunity for Republicans to maintain control of a Senate seat. But that all came crashing down when Sean Parnell dropped out of the race, the presumed Republican nominee, who had been endorsed by President Trump for nearly a year before his dropping out of the race, and that made the field open, in which many candidates vied for it, and ultimately, Dr. Oz won the nomination. With Dr. Oz winning the nomination, the race itself became less competitive. In fact, 538 started out before we actually saw the direct impact of what a Dr. Oz ticket would actually do to the Pennsylvania ballot. Dr. Oz had the advantage when it came down to the forecast. He had, at his peak, a 65% chance of victory. It is factual that in June of 2022, it is very possible that Republicans would have fared better than they would today, because this was based off of fundamentals, but not necessarily based off of strict polling data, and it still very much isn't now, but it definitely plays a major role. But it was clear that the odds were getting narrower, and then it was narrow and narrow and narrow, and Oz and Fetterman were within a close and competitive race. But then Fetterman started to take it away from Oz, started to build a tremendous advantage over him to a point where he was at an 83% chance at winning as a Democrat in a Republican seat. And while the upward trend was there, it started to falter. It started to go down, and then it went down and down and down, and now today, Democrats have just a 61% chance at winning this seat. Now, don't let me undersell the Democratic Party to you on this front. Them even having the possibility, much less the advantage, at maintaining control of the Senate is a huge victory on their part. It means they are significantly outperforming expectations all across the country, and the numbers show it. The Republican Party in recent elections, 2010 and 2014 and 2018, have all gained Senate seats, 3 in 2018, 9 in 2014, 6 or 7 in 2010. Winning by that amount is significantly more than what Republicans need in this election cycle. Republicans need just one. They've done better than that, even in a blue wave year like 2018, where they didn't actually win 3. They picked up more than 3, actually, but they ended up seeing that counteracted by Democratic victories in Arizona and Nevada, but ultimately a net gain of 2. But regardless, double what Republicans need right now. And when I see that, I still very much need to applaud the Democratic Party on that front, that they did very well, that they were able to win and maintain control of many of these seats, and we will find that to be true at the end of this upcoming month. But there also lies in the very real possibility that Republicans do win control of the Senate because it is so exceptionally easy to do so. Pennsylvania wasn't always super easy to do so, though, as the numbers seem to have suggested. In fact, the political betting markets, the ones that are dictated by the way that those with money and decide to spend it on politics, believe the race is going to go, in which Dr. Oz has 57 cents for a yes share to John Fetterman's 46 cents, which means the betting markets believe that Dr. Oz is the favorite within this race for the first time in 90 days. The reason why that's significant, well, the first time in 90 days means that as we get closer to the election, it's very unlikely that we start to see things get better for John Fetterman by a dramatic margin. John Fetterman is in a position where he needed to maintain his level of lead and advantage over Dr. Oz, but that simply has not occurred. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that the betting markets have Dr. Oz as the favorite, despite FiveThirtyEight not having him as the favorite. But it really isn't just that. When you look at the election data for the Pennsylvania Senate race, Dr. Oz has not led in a singular poll this entire election cycle. From the very beginning, John Fetterman has maintained a lead against Oz, and quite frankly, for a period of time, it was extremely substantial. So it really just didn't make sense for Dr. Oz and John Fetterman to be within a competitive race. But personally, I always knew that it would be competitive because at the end of the day, this is Pennsylvania. But just looking at the numbers that I see on the Real Clear Politics average, we have a tie, Fetterman +2, +2, +6, +2, the overall average being Fetterman +2.4. The race is undeniably competitive. And it seemingly is getting close to being where it was back in 2016, when Katie McGinty was defeating Pat Toomey in the polls by 2 points across the state. Pat Toomey ultimately ended up winning by 1.6%. That in itself was impressive, because he was able to outperform the margin of victory that the polls had predicted for Katie McGinty. It was something to be applauded for the national GOP. They saw this as a plus. They saw it as a vindication when everyone was saying that Katie McGinty was going to win, including expert forecasters like Larry Sadler's crystal ball, like many others. In fact, FiveThirtyEight had Katie McGinty, I think, at about an 80% chance of victory. So when I remember that, when I remember the 80% chance of victory, when I remember the way that we treated this Senate race in the past, I wasn't covering the race. My channel did not exist then. I did not have a 2016 election prediction on my channel in 2016. The channel was created in, mid-2017. But, the point is that the discussion and discourse around the race was that it was Katie McGinty's race to lose, and she lost it. I don't think that's necessarily the case when it comes down to Pennsylvania in 2022. At the end of the day, Republicans currently hold the seat, and since it is a year significantly better for the GOP than 2020, when Biden only won the state by 1.2%, this is the Republican Party's race to lose. Even though John Fetterman started out with the lead, no one could have foreseen that, and at the end of the day, Republicans are the ones with the incumbent seat. There is no way for me to draw and crack this way, to make excuses for the national GOP. This is their race to lose, and they very well just might. But I also find it just very interesting. The betting markets are predicting something different from what practically everything else is telling us. Maybe they know something that we don't. Dr. Oz has a reasonable chance, and his narrowing up the race cannot be denied. It is very clear that Pennsylvania has become a lot more competitive than where it once was. In fact, at different points in time, Pennsylvania was not even closer than states such as Wisconsin, where you see a significant large margin of advantage for Ron Johnson. It was a lot closer before. It was 50-50 at one point in time, and then all of a sudden now it's 76-24. That was a complete total turnaround in favor of the GOP. States such as Pennsylvania was more pro-Democrat than some other states as well. More pro-Democrat at some points than the state of Georgia, which it technically still is at this point in time, but in some cases more so than the state of Arizona, sometimes being on par with where New Hampshire is right now. I mean, what we found in Pennsylvania was ultimately that the Democratic Party was doing better than we could have ever even expected. Very, very interesting. You see, I see it as a possibility for the Democratic Party as still an amazing pickup opportunity. I think if they win Pennsylvania, it is an indicator that they win control of the Senate, and it means that Democrats will be representing the state of Pennsylvania for 2 senators until 2024 and holding this seat until 2028. That's a long period of time. That is a very long period of time, and it's something that Democrats should look at and say, that's why this race is ultimately so important. Balance of power is also equally as important. In fact, more important than maintaining a Democratic legacy, but it does help Democrats down the line if they're looking for people to campaign with them in Pennsylvania to maintain the blue nature of the state. It is trending rightward, and we can see that when it comes down to demographic shifts, Biden just simply was able to overcome and displace that overall trend and move it back in the Democratic Party's direction. But I can imagine in 10 to 20 years, Pennsylvania is no longer a swing state, but rather a right-leaning state. And the opposite, I think, will likely happen in states such as Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina as we get into the next 10 to 20 years. But just seeing the possibility that Dr. Oz can, defy this margin of error, I also call into question, how accurate have polls been in the past in Pennsylvania? I already showed you 2016 where it was a bit iffy because we saw that there was a discrepancy. McGinty was supposed to win by 2. Pat Toomey won by about 1.6. To be fair, though, nearly all of the margins of error that we saw in these polls were outside of it, or were inside of it when it came down to the actual error. So in a way, they did account for it. But when you look at other political data, honestly speaking, Pennsylvania isn't that far off. In 2010, it said that Pat Toomey would win by 4.5. He ended up winning by 2. And if anything, that was a Democratic overperformance versus the polls. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was supposed to win by 1.9. She lost by 0.7. That's about a 3-point difference. Not super dramatic, but it could make a difference between John Fetterman and being a U.S. Senator or not. But in 2020, that's when the numbers really seemed to be quite accurate. When it came down to the Real Clear Politics average, Biden was leading by 1.2%, and the final results were 1.2%. Some notable pollsters here that you might recognize: Insider Advantage, Marist College, Trafalgar, Rasmussen Report, Susquehanna, Trafalgar, and Insider Advantage all were wrong. They said Trump was going to win. So when you see some of this new data that's saying an Insider Advantage is going to be a tie, Trafalgar says that Fetterman's up by only 2, I start to say to myself at least, is there a possibility that they are also indeed wrong? Is there a possibility that they were wrong as they were back in 2020? Just something to think about, just something to take into consideration, because it's possible that they are. But then again, they've had time to correct their methodologies and get things to be more accurate. But right now, what we should take away from this is that the race itself is likely going to be one of the most competitive races of this election cycle. I personally do not think that is going to be a question. I think Pennsylvania was always meant to be competitive as well, and in my most recent projection, I have it as a state that is tilt blue, which means that I expect it to be decided by less than 1%. This race is hard to predict, simply because it is a swing state, it is a Biden +1 state, it is a Trump +1 state, and we're working with a national environment where there are significant advantages for the GOP, but significant disadvantages to the Republican Party in the state of Pennsylvania, simply on the account of nominating Dr. Oz. He's no Mastriano. Doug Mastriano is, in fact, probably weighing down the Senate race here. You can see Fetterman is up by 2, but Shapiro, the Democratic nominee for governor, currently the Attorney General, is leading by 9.6. I mean, a clear and consistent drop-off between those who are backing Shapiro versus those who are backing Fetterman, and it isn't helping Fetterman to an extent, but there is a possibility that it is harming Dr. Oz. That Mastriano being on the ballot is harming Dr. Oz. I think this race would be likely Republican, though, should there had been Dave McCormick chosen and nominated by the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. It was so close yet so far, but honestly speaking, if that was the case, I do believe Pennsylvania Senate race would be in much better hands for the GOP, but that's just the product of a new wave of Trumpism, a new wave of right-wing ideology that wasn't seen before, celebrity status when it comes down to political decision-making. Herschel Walker, Tommy Tuberville, Dr. Oz, Donald Trump, these are the same people that come from not necessarily all reality TV, but TV personalities, media personalities, celebrities that are deciding to run for office and in some cases doing quite well. This would be an amazing case for Dr. Oz. If he was actually going to win the Pennsylvania Senate race, quite frankly, he's not even from the state of Pennsylvania. He lives in the state of New Jersey, and that's the interesting thing. That's not a Democratic talking point. That is absolutely factual. The home that he owns to become eligible to run in Pennsylvania, he bought for the sake of running in the campaign. So when I think about that, I am understanding, that Dr. Oz is not from Pennsylvania, but very well could represent the state. The reason why Dr. Oz is doing well, at least enough, is because of partisanship. If this was 2018, Dr. Oz would be blown out of the margin the same way that Republicans were back in 2018. Looking at those numbers, Bob Casey won by 13 points in the Senate race, won in the governor's race. Tom Wolf won by 17 points. Why did that happen? Sure, they're popular incumbents, but also the fact that it was a blue wave year, and that benefited them quite tremendously. We will see what happens if new polls come out that show Dr. Oz leading. I would be personally inclined to expect Dr. Oz to win the Senate race. As of right now, I still believe that John Fetterman is going to win, but I could be, quite frankly, easily convinced that Dr. Oz does come out ahead. I think partisanship, I think polarization, I think a lot has made a negative impact on the Democratic Party's chances at in the Senate in Pennsylvania, even if they are running against someone like Dr. Oz. Because looking around the country, not only in Pennsylvania, but in other states with celebrity-style nominees, with unqualified type of nominees, Blake Masters, Herschel Walker, what you still find is that these Republicans still have a very good shot at victory, and it's simply because of the R by their name. It doesn't matter in this current stage of American politics who it is, what they represent, as long as they have the party. When you move beyond the primary, they are winning their election if they come from a Democratic or Republican area, or if it's a swing state, both parties, regardless of candidate quality, seemingly have a very good shot at victory. So we'll see what happens. Pennsylvania will be quite fascinating, quite interesting to say the least. I think as of right now, the state of Pennsylvania is going to be one to closely watch, but it still could be a victory for the Democratic Party, but there's no guarantee on that front that ends up becoming the reality. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.